Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the UK state pension and how it's changed over the last 100 years or so. Now, the first universal state pension in the UK was the old age pension, which was introduced in 1909. Now, I say universal, it was actually a means tested benefit, which meant that if you were getting income above a certain level, you would find your old age pension reduced, or you might not even receive one at all. It was also payable only from age 70, so it was quite a restricted benefit. Now, this continued to be the only source of state pension in the UK until 1928. In 1928 we saw the introduction of the old age contributory pension. Now, this was a pension payable from age 65 to 70 for those people that had paid sufficient national insurance contributions. Now, national insurance contributions themselves had been introduced only in 1911 to cover unemployment and sickness benefits, and this was the first time they'd been applied to cover pensions as well. In 1940 we saw the state pension age for women fall from 65 to 60, but the next big change was in 1948, and this saw the introduction of the basic state pension, which replaced the old age pension. Now, the basic state pension was payable from age 65 for men, from age 60 for women, and to everybody who had an adequate national insurance contribution record. Now, not everybody would have had long enough to build up a decent national insurance record, so at the same time that the basic state pension was introduced, we also saw the introduction of something called national assistance. Now, national assistance was a kind of safety net pension for those people that couldn't have had the time to build up a basic state pension. And we've had this safety net ever since. We had national assistance first in 1948, then in 1966 this was replaced with supplementary benefits, then in 1988 we saw income support, and 2003 we saw the pension credit. Now, it was always intended that the basic state pension would only ever be a very basic level of benefit, and that it would be supplemented with some sort of government supported earnings related scheme. Now, the first iteration of this was the graduated retirement benefit, which was introduced in 1961. What you get here was, in exchange for the payment of additional national insurance contributions, slices of additional pension payable from your state pension age. But the problem was these pensions had no guaranteed inflation protection. So when the 1970s came along and inflation really started to take off, the value of these benefits really started to dwindle. As a result, the graduated retirement benefit was abandoned in 1978 in favour of the State Earnings Related Pension Scheme, or SERPS. Now, SERPS was a much more generous benefit. The intention was that after your full working life you would accumulate a pension of 25% of your band earnings. And band earnings here were defined as the difference between the lower and the upper earnings limit, the lower earnings limit being around the level of the basic state pension, and the upper earnings limit being about the level at which you'd start paying higher rate tax. Now, this was clearly a much more generous benefit than the graduated retirement benefit, but perhaps it was a little bit too generous, because only 10 years later in 1988 the whole system was revamped and the level of the benefits was reduced for anybody retiring after 1999. In particular, if you retired between 1999 and 2009, you saw your target level of accrual falling from 25% of band earnings down to 20% of band earnings, so quite a considerable drop. But it was still a much more generous benefit than the graduated retirement benefit had been. Now, SERPS continued until 2002, when it was replaced with S2P, the state second pension. Now, this appeared at first quite similar to the state earnings related pension scheme, at least for high earners. The rate of accrual there was still in line with what people would have been earning under SERPS. But if you looked inside it, it was a little more complicated. So SERPS looked at a target pension based on all of your band earnings. What S2P did was to break that band earnings down into three tranches. In the first of these tranches, you would be accruing pensions at twice the rate you would have under SERPS. The second tranche, you would have accrued benefits at only half the rate, and the third tranche would have been at the same rate as SERPS. So what this meant was that after this reduction in the value of benefits that we saw through the lifetime of SERPS, we now had a redistribution of benefits, such that the middle earners were starting to subsidise the very low earners. In fact, even if you were paying only a very low level of national insurance contributions, you were deemed to have paid sufficient to meet the top of that first tranche of earnings. So it really was quite significantly redistributive. Now in 2009 there was a slight change. The band earnings definition changed slightly. So rather than being from the lower earnings limit to the upper earnings limit, it was now just up to the upper accrual point. And all the upper accrual point was the level of the upper earnings limit as in 2009. So it just fixed the top level of your band earnings at a fixed amount which hasn't increased since. The next change came in 2010, where the top two tranches within those band earnings were combined, and the accrual for both of those was at the lower level of only half that you would have accrued under SERPS. So again, more redistributive, taking away from the higher earners and giving to the lower earners. Now, S2P continued until 2016, when it was replaced, along with the basic state pension, by the new state pension. Now, on the face of it, the new state pension does look quite generous relative to the basic state pension. And for low earners, if you look at what low earners would have managed to earn from S2P in addition to the basic state pension, again, the new state pension does look quite generous. It looks quite a lot less generous than you would have earned if you were a high earner. If you look at the maximum amount of S2P plus basic state pension that you would have managed to get and compare that with the new state pension, you see quite a drop. And as a result of that, the new state pension will also attract various supplements for people that would have received more had they retired on S2P and the basic state pension. And you can see from this chart just the way in which these benefits have changed over time. If you look at this chart, this chart for a start is in constant earnings term. So what it shows is the amount of pension that someone would have received had they retired in 1979, 1980, 1981 and so on. And we've got a number of lines on here. The lowest line, the bottom line, shows the earnings adjusted value of the basic state pension. Now you can see it climbs slightly at first because the basic state pension used to be linked to earnings. After that it drops quite considerably in earnings terms and levels off when we get to more recent times when we've had the triple lock. I'll talk about those aspects in a later film. If you look at SERPS, or rather the payment that someone would have received from SERPS and the basic state pension if they were a high earner, that gives you the top line. Now first, this line climbs from 1979 up to 1999. And this just reflects the fact that SERPS didn't exist before 1978, so you couldn't have accrued any SERPS before that point. As you retire later, up to 1999, you're able to accrue more SERPS, so your pension when you retire later increases even in earnings adjusted terms. In 1999 through to 2009 we see that fall in the value of the pension because people retiring then were affected by this lower accrual rate, and then we see it stabilise after that point. We can see a small line at the end which is the level of the new state pension, which as I say is higher than the basic state pension and also higher than the basic state pension plus the state second pension for very low earners. But this is a little bit misleading because these low earners only would have accrued any state second pension from 2002. They wouldn't have accrued any SERPS at all. And if you project back what they would have earned from a second state pension or SERPS had this rule been in place for the very low earners, that they would have been deemed to have earned some sort of pension, you can see that those people, the low earners would actually end up being better off from these hypothetical pensions than they would under the new state pension. So the new state pension is both a reduction in the value of benefits that people could expect to receive from the state pension, and it's also a much greater redistribution of the benefits because essentially now we don't have any earnings related pension. We do still have earnings related national insurance contributions, so there does seem to be a bit of a mismatch here, and there could be an argument for even getting rid of national insurance contributions altogether and folding them in to income tax. So hopefully that gives a good overview of how the basic state pension and how the pension system overall has changed over the last 100 years or so. And I will cover some of the points I just touched on there in more detail in subsequent videos.